This should be Module 9 of the History of the American Musical, and it's devoted to Cole Porter. An awful lot of students who take this course and write up course evaluations and those sort of things, when they write comments, they tell me that this is one of their favorite lectures, that this is one of the stories they found the most interesting. Hopefully you will too. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Porter's life. We're going to get into some of the trademarks of his music, sort of a, you know, you're listening to Cole Porter when, and I'll talk to you about some specific shows. Please keep those emails coming and those comments coming on the discussion groups. We are going to start a discussion group about Cole Porter connected to this module, and you'll see that link right under the link for this film. Cole Porter was born, here's where you can kind of trick people. Cole Porter was born in Peru, Indiana. Indiana, in June of 1893. He came to wealth. His grandfather had a lot of money in coal. His mother was a very cultured woman. His mother and father separated and eventually divorced, and he wound up living with his mom and his grandmother. She guided him through the arduous task as a child of writing an operetta himself. When he was 10 years old, he had his operetta published by a Chicago firm. So once again, we're looking at another of these sort of child prodigy types with Porter. As you can see, Porter lived, well, relatively for a long time, but there's a real tragedy in the middle of Cole Porter's life. He was around from 1893 until 1964, and right almost in the middle of that comes a major turning point in his life. It's the kind of biography that has everything that happened up to this point and everything that happened after this point as two different things. Cole Porter went to Yale University in 1909. In fact, he wrote Yale's alma mater, the Bulldog song, and also their football fight song. He sang and directed the Glee Club there, and he helped produce college shows. After his graduation, he went to Harvard Law School, where he stayed there for just a single year. Having by now, though, decided that his future would really rest with music, he transferred to a school of music at Harvard and wound up collaborating with a couple people over there. When America plunged into World War I, Porter was entered into the military and wound up in French officers' school. His training involved teaching American soldiers French gunnery and vice versa. He acquired a luxurious apartment in Paris through his family, which would become important to him at one point. He traveled throughout North Africa with the French Foreign Legion, carrying a small portable piano on his back and entertaining Allied troops in camps from place to place. And for this was given a number of military awards, including the French Croix de Guerre and several American equivalents. Porter had this fascinating life and a really varied one. I guess this is the spot where I have to mention, because it is relevant to so many other aspects of his life, that Cole Porter was gay. And the fact that he was gay gave him great trouble in life. He didn't really embrace that. He was not proud of that fact, and he struggled with it for large parts of his life. After the war, he repaired to that apartment in Paris, where he would lay the groundwork for his reputation as this wealthy playboy and one of Europe's most gracious hosts. And the parties at Cole Porter's apartment penthouse were renowned, not only for the number of famous people that appeared there, but for the debauchery. There were, you know, large swimming pool parties. He had a swimming pool on the rooftop of his building. There were parties that would last until the dawn, and all sorts of famous celebrities and popular people of the day the thing to do was to be seen at one of these parties. Many members of Porter's family, such as his mother, felt that he was neglecting his original dream, that he was supposed to be a composer, and that he was spending so much time at these parties just trying to escape from the responsibility of doing anything important, that he should really rededicate himself to music and at least to something beyond parties every weekend. He kind of struggled with that, and eventually he did come to that conclusion as well. But not before something else very important happened. He married a woman named Linda Lee Thomas. And Linda Lee Thomas herself had quite a story of her own. She had been married once before to a man who was the producer and publisher of a newspaper, the Evening Sun. And her first husband, Russell Thomas, according to many reports, and by the way, this lecture today, this is one of the more true Hollywood story gossip-filled lectures. I apologize for that. But it is said that he was quite abusive, and that he was not a terribly good person, and not terribly good to her in particular. Although they lived in a life of opulence, he was a very violent man. She divorced him for this reason. And in this time period, just at the very dawn of the 1920s, being a divorcee in society was a dangerous thing. Women were not necessarily welcomed back to parties. It was hard for them to find jobs, and the legal arrangements of the divorce were not such that Thomas was going to be put in a very good position financially. Her very best friend through all these difficult times, because she was attending these parties, was Mr. Cole Porter, and they would share personal stories, and they would help each other through these dark times. And eventually, Cole Porter decided that the best thing for both of them would be for them to get married. And they did. They were married in 1919 and were married right up until her death in the 1950s. But their wedding and their marriage was a particularly unusual one. Thomas knew that Porter was gay, and Porter knew that Thomas was much more of a socialite. And the arrangement that they had was that it was better for both of them to be publicly married than it was for either of them to be single. And that even though they were married, they could both pursue behind closed doors the lifestyles that each of them preferred. Porter was there as an advisor, as a best friend, and that sort of thing, but it was a marriage that did not necessarily have a whole heck of a lot of sex or physical romance to it. Thomas knew full well that Porter was gay and gave him advice very often on both his social life and how to keep it out of the limelight for his career. But in the end, when she died, he was quite lost without her, and really believed that certain things that happened in his life would not have happened if she was still around. He mourned her terribly, and their relationship was a real, genuine, decades upon decades long relationship. Just the nature of it, now we know, historically, was not quite what we would have thought. Porter developed a lot of music in this time period, particularly jazz, for places like the Scola Cantorum in Paris and some of the renowned French nightclubs at other places, and for the most part became sort of this celebrity, this man about town. And in this era, being married was enough to, all by itself, was enough to quell speculation in the press about his sexuality. Perhaps in today's day and age that might not have been enough. When I mentioned that there were two sides to Cole Porter's life, a before and an after, the turning point happens in 1937. Porter, riding horseback at the estate of a friend, the Countess de Zipola, on Long Island, New York, was out very early in the morning and was out alone, and was thrown when a horse tripped over a rock, and the horse broke a leg or an ankle or something, and also landed squarely on top of him. Porter was pinned under the horse for hours, and no one could find him. And when they finally did find him, his legs and his lower spine were so badly crushed, and the nerve tissues were so seriously damaged, that it was determined that he would have to undergo at least an amputation and not be able to walk again. They saved his legs because he insisted upon that, and he felt that he could someday walk. And so he spent 7 years continually in and out of the hospital, paralyzed and unable to walk, but undergoing a number of operations, different medical treatments, different experimental treatments, and things like that. He lived in almost constant pain at this point, and immediately after the accident in 1937, he sort of withdrew from the public and hid, became very much a recluse, was of the opinion that his current self in a wheelchair and unable to walk was some sort of a freakish thing, and that he shouldn't be exposed to the public, and was kind of, well, a very eccentric recluse. He also turned to painkillers quite a bit in order to cope with the situation that he was in. He became very much an addict to painkillers. It's said that Porter lived in the late 1930s with only a couple of people by his side. Linda Thomas and another butler slash house servant, another person that lived in the house, and that these folks would edit newspapers to make sure nothing too upsetting would come to Mr. Porter, and cut stories out they didn't think he wanted to see, and they would bring in his food and let him sort of hide from the world. depending on who you talk to, either deliberately or accidentally, a news editorial did get across to him that was not cut out of his newspaper, and it said something along the lines of whatever happened to Cole Porter and how the state of music had so fallen apart since Porter had disappeared from the world, but that clearly he would not be able to keep up with what, with what was happening in music at that point. That really lit a fire under him. He sort of wheeled his way over to a piano and immediately and frankly began writing again. And by 1941, he had new music out. And by 1948, he had written a true masterpiece, a piece called Kiss Me Kate. What's interesting is that the Porter musical style sounds a little different pre- and post-accident. Pre-accident Cole Porter is a little bit cartoony, it's a little bit bright, it's a little bit amusing and fun. The post stuff is a little bit more lush and a little bit more romantic and more serious. I wish I could say that the Porter story biographically ends well. It does not. Cole Porter, as I said, Linda Thomas died in 1954. Doctors did finally amputate Porter's right leg in 1958. After that, his creative productivity and his power and happiness completely waned. He often said that he did not authorize the amputation and that Linda would never have agreed to it. Some say that that's not true, that he just misremembered things when he came out of the operation. But in any case, he died in October of 1964, very much in accordance to his wishes. He was buried between his wife and his father. That's a little bit of a surprise because his father had almost an irrelevant role in his upbringing, and many reports have circled that he was not buried there but with his mother. This is not true. The popularity of his individual songs has lasted beyond the common knowledge of that story and of that biography. And in Unit 2 of our time together today, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about specific Cole Porter work. Some of the trademarks, some of the themes, some of the things that say that these are, like I said, it's a Porter song when. And particularly about two shows that I want to kind of hold up as an example. One of them before the accident, a show called Anything Goes from 1934, and Kiss Me Kate from 1948. So we'll, feel free to take your break between these if you'd like to. Grab a listen to a couple of the Cole Porter songs that will be linked to this module. And in our next chapter, we'll talk about Porter's work as opposed to Porter the man. I'll see you then.